Hi, I'm Adam from Ace Engineering, and I kind of want to walk through the installation of our JL standalone tire carrier. So we're going to get all the pieces together, we got everything out of the box. This is where we're going to start the video, and we're going to start here just because we already have removed the factory tire carrier. That's all removed, all the wiring is pulled back inside the vehicle. Let's open the gate and kind of talk about what we've done on the inside in order to get this ready. So we've done a couple things. One, we removed this panel. We brought the wiring back through the gate. It's over in this area. And this is the area where you're going to tie into your new electrical, which will be your third brake light, your courtesy light, and your camera is going to go back through the gate itself. So let's remove that. We also removed the panel on the inside of the Jeep. And we also cut out the little paper gasket that's around the hinge location. So we remove those so we can access these 3 bolts to the factory hinges in these locations. So that's a good start. Once we get to that point, we can start the installation process. All right, so we've got everything out of the box. I've done some sub-assembly here so we can start everything. So basically, the hinge assemblies we're gonna put together in the 2-piece, put the bolt and the washers and the nut on both the hinges. This is the obviously license plate mount. We installed the new camera. You have the hardware included, the new third brake light and courtesy light. I've got that on there. The plate, obviously. You have all of these connectors and the butt splice connectors to put all of that together. I've got on the gate plate itself, I've got the heim joint location bolted in on the back side. So we've got a washer up here on the top, the through bolt, and the heim joints. We're gonna leave the cradle out for now. We're gonna do that at the end, and that's part of the final alignment of the tire carrier. On the tire carrier itself, we've got the tire mount into location. We've got also the Rotopack mounts, which also acts as a dampener for the spare tire. So the spare tire, once it's mounted and you draw this large bolt in from the back side, it will draw this telescoping tire carrier in, and what it's going to do is put pressure on these wings of the tire carrier to help support the tire itself. So now that we have that done, we're going to start by installing a couple of our hinges. All right, we're going to start by installing the top hinge. In order to do that, on the inside there's 3 13mm bolts. We're going to remove those and the 2 Torx 55 bolts on the outside. We're going to remove this hinge. We're going to install this hinge, the 3 bolts back in the factory location, and the 2 T55s back on our hinge. We're going to install those. We're not going to make them tight yet because we're going to do the final alignment at the end once everything's installed. All right, so after we open this, we're going to take out the 13mm. I leave the gate closed just because the gate's going to drop once you do loosen the hinges. So I'm going to put the first one in, bolt this one back into place, and do the bottom. The gate is still going to move and it's going to need final alignment, but I try to minimize that by holding it in place with the gate closed at this point. Back in the same factory location. So the inside bolts and the outside 2 hinge bolts, we just want to make snug. We don't need to make them tight yet because, like I said, we're going to move it around the dial in the tailgate at the finish. So now that this is done, we're going to repeat the process for the lower hinge. All right, so now we've got the hinges in, and just like I said, they're just kind of hand tight. We're going to put on the gate plate itself that connects the heim joint to the tire carrier. You're going to reuse those factory bolts that you took out of the factory tire carrier. And we've got 6 locations that those are going to go in. So get those started. All right, so now we've got this installed. We're going to put our vents back in. I've already ran some wiring through here. We're gonna talk about that later, but all the wiring and stuff that we'll give you basically will feed back through and tie in. Everything that was factory we talked about, we removed and brought it over. We need to bring that back a little bit so we have a little more room in it, especially the camera. The camera comes through, and in order to do that, you have to cut some of the factory connectors off just to give you a little more length. All right, so we've got all that finished. Now it's time to put the tire carrier in place. One of the reasons we left the bolts on the inside a little bit loose is just to make sure that all the joints fall into between the tire carrier itself. All right, now that we've got them started, we're gonna make sure we get this seated. We need to make sure that shoulder bolt comes all the way through to support the bottom of the bracket. So now we'll wiggle around and get those to drop through. So now we're fully seated here. We're seated here. So then we're gonna have a washer and a nut back on the bottom. We can go ahead and actually put that on. All right, now that we see that this is fully seated, we can go ahead and start to tighten both the upper and lower hinge bolt. All right, now that we've got this bolted in, these two are tight, we can go back to the inside and tighten up the inside. All the adjustment from here on out is going to be on the hinge side. On the back of the hinge on these T55 Torx bits, there's basically a nut plate on the inside. So there's a lot of movement there, and that's what we'll dial in at the end in order to get this thing to close properly. I was loosening that. All right, now we're going to connect the Heim joint. This is a little bit tricky. The spacer on the top, spacer on the bottom, and we're going to have to undo this a couple times just to make sure our distance from the gate is correct, but that'll come later towards the end. Right now, if you can kind of see the adjustment we have, there's probably 2 inches total. So we'll get this close, and then we'll do the final tweaks here at the end after everything's bolted together. On this setup, I'm going to run the Rotopax mount. So at this time, I'm going to take the Rotopax handles and get these into place. So I'll get that done, get it prepped, get the cans on there, and then we'll focus on getting the tire and everything adjusted. All right, Rotopax in. Now we'll work on the tire itself and getting this to line up. Now, as you can see, just from loosening the hinge, our gate's a little low. It's wanting to ramp up there. So we're going to basically, right now, we're going to unloosen the 4 T55, hold the gate up a little bit into position, see how much it moves. There's a lot of play in the gate. So we're going to bring it up maybe an inch or so, tighten them down, see where it fits, and then decide how to dial it in. So this harness that we supply you, basically we're going to route through the tire carrier into the back of the gate. We're going to tie into the courtesy light and the third brake light. Third brake light was their factory. We're just going to splice into that. The courtesy light, you can tie into where the factory courtesy light was on the license plate and route it back up, or go through and back down to the tail light. So basically when your parking lights are on or anything above that, the courtesy light will come on. When this routes through, basically that's what this slot is for in this location. is, so when we put our tire on, the tire's gonna sit out here, and when we put the license plate relocate, we can plug this in. So basically, at any point you need your spare tire, you're gonna disconnect the 2 quick disconnects, pull off your telescoping license plate, and remove the tire. So now we're gonna open the gate a little bit. I'm gonna put a little upward pressure on the gate as I tighten these Torx bits, just to get it snug so they'll stay in location. Now when I close it, it lines up. Now I'm gonna re-torque these back down. Now this is something that, you know, as we put the tire on and we make the final adjustments, you may have to play with a few times. And this is the hardest part of the install, is just getting the gate to close right and tightening the gate in the right location. The tire itself, on the tire carrier, all the load is transferred to the hinge location. There's no weight on the tailgate itself, so just getting that aligned. We want to make sure too, now we're going to put in the rubber snubber into this area that cradles the back of the tire carrier. We want to make sure when that gate's closing that the tire carrier is not putting downward force on the cradle, causing the tailgate to come down. So we're going to do all our adjustments without the cradle, and then at the very end put the cradle in location. The cradle's more for the fact we want to stop any in and out movement from the tailgate itself, not necessarily up and down. I mean, it supports it all the way around, but it's for in and out location more than it is vertical. So don't use the cradle to try to hold up the tire carrier itself, because the tire carrier is strong enough, it's just going to transfer the load back to the gate and push the gate down. All right, so we're getting close. We got the tire on, get this tightened up. The next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna adjust the tire stanchion. So on the back of the tire stanchion, which we'll show in a minute, there's a large diameter bolt, and that allows you to draw the tire into the tire carrier itself so it's nice and snug. After we tighten that up, then we'll tighten the big set screw bolt that's on the top, and that just locks it into place. All right, so on the top of the telescoping piece, there's a 3/4 inch bolt, and that's basically just a bolt that's going to go through the top piece of the telescoping tube and lock the bottom into place. We're going to make sure that's loosened right now. We're going to draw this in until it pulls the tire in, and it's up against the tire carrier and these 2 standoffs that are on the side of the tire carrier. Once that's in, we're going to tighten that 3/4 bolt back into position to lock everything tight. We're going to make sure this is backed off. Tighten this guy. Going to draw this in. That's drawing the tire back into this isolator. All right, pretty snug there. Now we can take this guy back down. And now that it's adjusted, you can take your tire on and off. You don't have to adjust it again once it's adjusted for the specific offset and tire you're running. All right, we've got our camera assembly, our third brake light, and our courtesy light all put into place. So we're gonna make sure the set screw is loose. You can put this in, and then we're gonna, I guess at the same time here, we're gonna plug our camera back in. Plug in the disconnects that you're given. Locked into place. Slide this guy in. Now just adjust the depth. Now we're going to tighten this bolt back up, the set screw, and that's just what stops the license plate and the camera mount from coming out. Yeah. All right. So basically now we're just going to readjust our hinge joint to make sure it's in location. Basically when this gets bolted in, we want to make sure that this cradle sits inside of here and touches the inside. So you can see I need to draw it in a little bit. What we want to make sure too is this is in a location that surrounds the cradle when it's installed. We don't want it up too high, So when this comes in further, it's pushing the load, transferring the load back onto the tailgate. So we want to make sure that's nice and centered, but we want to make sure we bring it back so it sits inside the cradle itself. So we got everything together. When I close the door, the heim joint needs to be adjusted a little bit more inward. So I'm going to break this again, separate the door from the tire carrier, shorten the heim joint, and put it back together. I think once we have it nesting in the cradle, then we're just going to have to adjust the T55s for the alignment of the door, and we should be able to wrap it up. Okay. All right, so we're going to do our final adjustment on the heim. So with the door about halfway open, as you see, I'm going to remove the top bolt to get back to the heim. And I'm going to start to tighten that heim until I can get the cradle to kind of nest inside the tire carrier itself. So I want to close that void up. How's that look? All right, so we've got everything adjusted, the heim joint's pulled all the way in. The last detail is going to be getting that gate to close properly so it's in alignment. And again, now after we've loosened those hinge bolts, it's moved all over the place since we started. So once we dial that in, get it torqued down, it's done. We don't have to adjust it again. It's just getting it right this time, taking the time to do it, and moving on. So as you can see, when we open the gate, when I close the tire, it's a little bit low right now. It's wanting to hit that ramp a little bit. So I'm going to loosen those T55s again. I'm going to bring this edge up again, tighten it back down now that we have everything into position. Once it's tightened, then we open and close the door freely. All right, now that we've got everything in place, you want to make sure your Zerk fittings are on all four of these. There's one on the inside, one on the inside, one here, and one back there. Make sure we grease those from the beginning. And I would do it, typically every 3 months. You do an oil change or something, just check them, hit them real quick, make sure it's lubed up so you have that nice and easy single-handed operation. All right, we've got everything adjusted, finished, opens and closes nicely. As you can see too, one of the things to look at is kind of look at your gaps all the way around. If those are drastically off, you want to make sure you adjust that before you start to close it even the first time, just so you don't cause any damage to the gate itself. And once it's aligned properly, you can see we've got the tire drawn in tightly, everything's mounted. It's a rigid mount, and we still have that single-handed operation. So everything's tight, hooked via the hind. It's still supported by the cradle when it opens. Through the whole process of the opening and closing, it's supported. Now we're going to go back, we're going to put on our interior panels on the inside, and that's a wrap. Finished up the JL standalone tire here.